This video provides a mini lesson for students on Unit 5, Day 14, African Americans and Native Americans in World War II. You just looked at this poster, Democracy, Double Victory at Home, Abroad, and thought about what the groups were that maybe would be connected to this image. So this is the a poster representing the Double Victory campaign or the Double V campaign. And this was the idea that African Americans had to fight for both freedom abroad and freedom at home. And so soldiers and Marines, sailors, airmen who were African Americans were aware they were fighting on two fronts, or really three fronts: Japan, Europe, and at home for freedom. So this slide is going to talk about the Navajo Code Talkers. The Navajo Code Talkers were vital members of the military who were mostly Native Americans who spoke or understood the Navajo language. The Navajo is an unwritten language that's extremely complex, and it was used as a code for the military to send messages to one another. Now, the language itself wasn't exactly the code. The Navajo Marines, who were known as the Code Talkers, used the language to build the code, and they worked really hard on that. And they also risked their lives in battle, mostly in the Pacific Theater. And one of the case studies you're going to learn about or read about is from the point of view of a code talker. And this slide talks about some of the African American experiences in World War II. And there were many African Americans who served in World War II, but this is two of the more common stories. The first is Dory Miller, who's pictured in this slide. And Dory Miller became famous for his actions during Pearl Harbor. The thing to know about African Americans in World War II is that the military was still very much segregated, and there was a lot of debate around whether African American men should be allowed to serve at all. And at first, African American men weren't recruited for the military and weren't drafted. But then, after much petitioning, African American men did serve, but still in limited capacities. So Dory Miller was relegated to be a cook in the Navy. He couldn't be in a combat position because of his race, because of the racism that the country was dealing with at the time. But at the Pearl Harbor attacks, Dory Miller manned a gun on one of the ships, and he's credited with taking down several enemy planes, and he was awarded for his actions. And he was actually, this picture of him is actually, I think, a recruitment poster encouraging young men to join. So again, during World War II, African-American men were facing a lot of racism. Segregation was the rule throughout the military, and African-American men were relegated to jobs that were away from combat. But the Tuskegee Airmen came about when an experiment was put into place to see if African-American men could be trained as combat pilots. Of course, because race does not determine your ability. The African Americans who became pilots here were incredibly important to the effort and flew dozens of missions, risking their lives every day. One of the case studies you're going to read is the experience of Dory Miller, and another case study you're going to read is the experience of one of the Tuskegee Airmen. So I'm going to walk you through the beginning of the Dory Miller case study because it's a little less straightforward and it will give you a good example of what you need to do. So you're going to follow your teacher's directions on which case study to work on and take notes in your graphic organizer. So the Dory Miller case study has a selection of primary source documents that you can look at to find out some of the advancements and opportunities that Dory Miller faced, as well as some of the limitations and discrimination. If you're doing the next two case studies, then you're going to have quotes from the men themselves, and you can determine advancement opportunities and limitation discrimination that they faced through those quotes. So to demonstrate, this is a manifest from the crew. It's the muster roll of the crew that Dory Miller was a part of in World War II when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I'm going to look at it a little bit more closely. So this is the muster roll, and I actually can scroll down and I can find Miller himself, Doris Miller, right here. So if I read at Doris Miller, that's his That's his ID number. This is when he enlisted. This is when he joined the crew. And this right here is the most important information I can gather from this document, and that's his rank. So I actually looked up what MATT 2C meant. And I figured out before I looked it up that 2C means second class. So it's first class, second class, third class. So MATT means mess attendant. So what that means is that Dory Miller was a cook. He worked in the mess hall on the ship, and that was because of his race. So when I go back to my slides, I add that information here. Now, first of all, there was an advancement opportunity that African Americans men could serve in the military, even though it might not seem like that to us now. But he was limited to service positions, like being a cook, due to his race. And many men wanted the opportunity to go into combat. And so, of course, these segregationist policies were very, very racist and limited. And I'll do one more for you. So this is a political cartoon from the 1941. It's right after it's remembering the Pearl Harbor attacks. And you can see Dory Miller is here. I'll pull it up a little bit closer. You can see Dory Miller is named with his name on the back of the uniform, which is not accurate, but it's just identifying who he is. And so from this, I'm looking. They identify that it's Pearl Harbor. They identify that he's shooting down enemy planes, and it's a recognition of himself. And I can determine based on this, the idea of saying remember and the way Dory Miller is portrayed as being a noble fighter, that this is really a recognition political cartoon. So when I add to my chart, I'm going to point out that he was recognized as a hero for his actions during the Pearl Harbor attacks as an advancement and opportunity. I'm also going to point out that he wasn't even trained on the guns because of his race and because of segregation in the military, which is a little bit of extra background knowledge, but you can bring in extra background knowledge into your analysis of the documents. So you're going to continue this on your own. Remember to follow your teacher's directions and complete the case study that you're told to complete, and fill out the graphic organizer as you go. Check back to the video if you have any questions.